So moving on then, who wrote this and when was it written? Between the people and the government today lies a double standard of morality. Anything remotely scientific has become by government definition a matter of military security first, hence of secrecy, something which does not breed security but fear. If we see anything unusual, even in the skies, we the people must either freeze our lips like a Russian peasant at the sight of a commissar, or give our names, addresses and business connections and testimony to be screened and filtered by anonymous intelligence officers. Feared and respected by many people, these anonymous creatures can deny what we say, ridicule what we say, and sometimes, in an increasing number of countries, jail us for what we say, especially if our timing does not match to the second their intended official pronouncements on the subject. And we're kind of seeing that a little bit with people posting on social media certain things. Not about UFOs, but other topics. So it's the theme of that rather than kind of what it was about at the time, which is, it was about stuff about flying saucers. And that was written in 1950 by Frank Scully, and it's Behind the Flying Saucers. So you can see, again, there's common themes to what we were experiencing now in many ways. Yes. So there have been formal investigations. There's been a lot of talk about doing, investigations into the UFO phenomenon, but these have already been done. The first one was done by these are all primarily by the US, but there's a couple that are not. So I'm going to talk about UFOs, by which in most cases I really mean craft of extraterrestrial origin. So when people say UFO, really it means unidentified flying object, as I'm sure you all know, but what they really mean when they say it is, a spaceship from another planet. That's what most people mean. Now they've changed it to say UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, but they still mean craft of extraterrestrial origin, really, which is what I mean when I say UFO. And the UFO term was coined by Edward J. Ruppelt in 1952, and the coining of this term itself includes the idea that the object cannot be properly characterised, but in many cases this isn't true. The military know what some of these objects are. Several formal investigations have already been done by several different governments around the world. Project Time, 1948. Project Grudge followed that, 1949 to the 1950s. Project Blue Book, which is the one that most people have heard of, that ran in the 1950s and 1960s. And then the Condon Report in 1968-9, which the conclusions of that were written before, it was actually all the evidence was gathered. There's also, less well known as Project Saucer, which was initiated by the US Department of Defense in January 1948, and a report was published via Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which was then Wright Field, the following year. And that's a very key place in UFO history, is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, because that is almost certainly where they took the crashed Roswell craft. And if you look at other things that come out of that, it's very, very interesting. In addition, 2 sets of congressional hearings took place in the USA in 1966 and 1968. So they've had hearings about this already before, years and years ago, decades ago, and they often fail to report that. I don't know how many people in the audience have heard of this, the Cometa Report. Anyone ever heard of that? Most people never heard of it. In 1999, the French government published a report entitled, slight title there, UFOs and Defence, What Must Be Prepared For. This important 90-page document was not officially translated into English and is, to this day, rarely discussed. Perhaps the non-translation is a good excuse for the fact that if you go to the BBC News website or any similar website and enter Cometa as a search keyword, you will find nothing. A summary of the report by Gildas Bourdais, he published a magazine, I forget the name of it. The study was carried out over several years by an independent group of former auditors at the Institute of Advanced Studies for National Defence, or IHEDN, and by qualified experts from various fields, before its public release. It was sent to French President Jacques Chirac and to Prime Minister Lionel Jospin. In the conclusion it states, the extraterrestrial hypothesis is far from the best scientific hypothesis. It certainly has not been categorically proven, but strong presumptions exist in its favour, and if it is correct, it is loaded with consequences. So they're saying, yeah, it might be aliens. Basically, that's what that report said, or aliens might be involved with it. That's pretty significant for highbrow defence people to say that. And this chap, Admiral Peter Hilt Norton, he died in about 2005. He said this should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation and not the subject of rubbishing by tabloid newspapers. Now, things have changed a bit in the last sort of 8, 9, 10 years, and they're moving away from the ridicule now, and more saying, oh, well, it could be a threat, it could be a risk to aircraft. That's certainly been the narrative in the sort of past 4 to 5 years. But I don't think Peter Hill Norton realised, how this all worked. I mean, he did speak out a lot, and he risked a lot by speaking out at the time. He was retired when he did. He did meet a lot of these witnesses from the Rendlesham case, which I'll try and mention a bit about later on. So we're now going to try and look at some UFO cases and evidence. But I want first to go way back to Wilbert Smith and UFO disclosure. Now, I've got some audio clips here, and they're not very clear. I tried to clean them up, but it's not that successful. I should have really done a transcript, but you at least can hear his voice.
Possibly one of the most interesting aspects of the study of flying saucers, beyond the realization that they are real and extraterrestrial, is their philosophy. What manner of creatures build and fly them? What do they look like? How do they think? Are their ideas and ideals similar to ours? Could we understand them? All these and many other questions plague the serious investigator.
So Smith, he became the superintendent of radio regulations in Canada. He held 37 patents when he died. He died of cancer of the lower bowel, as you see, in 1962. Now, why his name is so significant but rarely mentioned is because of this document, the top secret memo. Now, it was written by Wilbert Smith in November 1950, and you see it says Department of Transport. He sent it it was an internal memo at the time, and a copy of it was discovered by this chap, researcher Nick Velasquez. It was discovered, a copy in the University of Ottawa archives. It was declassified by the Canadian government in 1979. And it was discovered before the MJ12 documents, as far as I know. So what did it say? Well, Smith wrote, I made discreet inquiries through the Canadian Embassy staff in Washington who were able to obtain for me the following information. The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than the H-bomb. Flying saucers exist. Their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. I was further informed that the United States authorities are investigating along quite a number of lines which might possibly be related to the sources, such as mental phenomena. Mental phenomena. And I gather they are not doing too well, since they indicated that if Canada is doing anything at all in geomagnetics, they would welcome a discussion with suitably accredited Canadians. You have to understand that Smith didn't believe in UFOs and flying saucers. He started his investigation in the late 40s as an extreme skeptic. And he was very methodical in the way that he did things. He had a master's degree in physics, and he helped set up the Canada's network of receiving stations for the spy network in the Second World War. He was a top guy, knew his stuff. Now this classification thing comes up in another document called the Special Operations Manual. I don't know when this was released, but in Ryan Wood's book, Magic Eyes Only, about UFO crashes, he's got 74 UFO crashes documented in that book with various degrees of evidence. It reproduces this on page 5 of the electronic document, labelled page 2 at the bottom. It says, 3. Security classification. All information related to MJ12 has been classified Magic Eyes Only and carries a security level 2 points above that of top secret. The reason for this has to do with the consequences that may arise not only from the impact upon the public should the existence of such matters become general knowledge, but also the danger of having such an advanced technology that has been recovered by the Air Force fall into the hands of unfriendly foreign powers, which we'll get back to later. No information is released to the public press, and the official government position is that no special group such as MJ12 exists. So this is what Wilbert Smith was told by Robert Sarbacher, that it was classified 2 points above top secret. That's in a completely separate document. And we'll get on to Robert Sarbacher now, because I mentioned that name, but he's on the next slide, I think. So the information about the classification of the UFO subject, i.e. 2 points higher than the H-bomb, it was given to Smith by Robert Sarbacher. Now again, I've got an audio clip here. The other one was okay. I think it's the next couple that are unclear.
Hello? Dr. Sarbacher? Yes? Hi, Sam Freeman up in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. Okay, let's see, early 50s. Now, the notes that I sent you from Wilbur Smith, do you remember talking? Yeah, the Canadian. Yeah, babe. Okay, his notes were 1950, and I mean, the exact date, September 15th were his notes, 1950. He asked you a question that you didn't answer at that time, which was rather fascinating. You've just given me the answer in a sense. He quotes you as saying, yes, it is classified 2 points higher even than the H-bomb. In fact, the most highly classified subject in the U.S. government at the present time. And what is the idea? Why? Well, it seems silly to me. Well, his next comment, that was supposedly what you said, and then his next comment was, may I ask the reason for the classification? And you said, you may ask, but I can't tell you. Do you think that? Because I didn't know. Oh, okay, not because of this crash. There's no mention of a crash per se in this note. Do you think it could have happened after that? I don't know. The man didn't say well. There was some talk somewhere. Huh?
So that's Sarbacher confirming that he gave the information to Smith. So Sarbacher was a government scientist, and he was sort of on the level of Robert Oppenheimer. And in fact, he probably knew Oppenheimer. And interestingly, the recent disclosure by this David Grush character, I haven't got him in the talk, but if you look for David Grush, he said that it was Robert Oppenheimer who helped set up the apparatus for UFO secrecy in the 1940s. He was one of the people involved. And in fact, all the UFO stuff went under the nuclear secrecy umbrella. That's what David Grush said, which would make sense because they'd already set up a security apparatus to keep all that stuff secret at Los Alamos National Laboratories, which is a name which comes up again and again. So Sarbacher, as I say, was a government scientist. I'm not going to read all this slide, but basically, in my book, and you can find it online, of course, as well, you'll learn about Sarbacher's son, where he said that Sarbacher had been tasked by the government to put a camera on the end of a missile. Now, they were firing these missiles when they saw flying saucers or these objects, not because at that point they wanted to shoot them down, that kind of came later, but because missiles were the only thing that was fast enough to catch up with a flying saucer at the time, or had the potential to do that. Yes, exactly, to track UFOs, or rather to photograph and watch them. When he first told me about the missiles, the first thing I thought was what? You were trying to destroy them? And he, Sarbacher Senior, said, very normally, as a matter of fact, no, we put cameras on the end of them. So that's what they were trying to do. And Sarbacher was involved in that. So Sarbacher knew about UFO secrecy. It's not clear who gave Smith the information about mental phenomena. It wasn't Sarbacher. Wilbur Smith left the memo draft memo in the files to give future researchers the truth of what had actually happened in the early days of government investigation into flying saucers. So all this stuff now that they're saying, oh, we don't really know what they are, we need a government investigation. No, they know exactly what they are. They've known this for over 70 years, Dying of cancer, Smith made arrangements with his wife to hide the files, including that memo, to survive his death. They will be coming to recover them, he told his wife Mel. As Smith predicted, Canadians, Americans and Soviets approached Mrs. Smith requesting the files for research purposes. Mrs. Smith told all callers she no longer had the files, and after a number of break-ins that might have been linked to the research for the files, they were passed to Arthur Bray, an Ottawa researcher who held them quietly for 20 years, and then they fell into the hands of Grant Cameron, who I got all this information from. This wasn't given to me directly. I'll skip over some of this. I've got some clips, but they're not very clear. So Smith really got into the UFO topic, and he had a massive amount of curiosity, and he wanted to know what was going on, what was behind it. And eventually, he established contact with people, and they gave information which they said came from two aliens, Affa and Tyler. And there's a whole story behind this as well. I've got a whole presentation about Wilbur Smith, actually, That's on YouTube and everything. This is on YouTube as well, actually. And so Smith wanted to try and build some hardware. He was told that how to build certain things, and he built this thing called a binding meter, which is meant to measure these binding forces, how materials are held together. And he said that the boys topside, that he called the aliens topside, they knew about binding forces and how materials were held together. And you could change these binding forces in a way of, as a way of, you know, propelling something or making materials work a certain way or be constructed a certain way. And then he built this binding meter from, you know, the instructions they gave him, which involved like a spring and some nylon, I think, or something, and then a needle. And these things worked. They shouldn't have worked according to our physics, but he said he tested them, and this audio clip is him talking about them. He also built a special type of coil, a caduceus coil, which was like a radio, piece of radio equipment, really. And he put all this current into it, and nothing came out. So he was able to find that this coil, which he knew about, because he was a radio engineer, behaved very oddly. Very, very oddly. And he also built a magnetic sync circuit to extract energy from the Earth's magnetic field. And he also built an anti-gravity experiment, later helped to set up a saucer detection station in 1954 at Shirley's Bay. And he discusses all of that in a talk I've got on my website. I'm not going to play this clip, though, it's just not very clear. Smith corresponded with several people stating he had handled a number of pieces of saucer hardware, from crashes or military encounters, and had been involved in their analysis. There's a chap called Art Bridge that Grant Cameron interviewed about 20 years ago, probably longer actually, 25 years ago by now at least. He was one of Smith's associates and stated that they were involved in an analysis of a lot of hardware that they were sent from the US. And Wilbert's son Jim Smith also handled one or more of these pieces of, you know, shot down UFO or crashed UFO. I've got a clip, I'm going to play this clip again, it's not very clear, but you'll hear him talking about this. I hope.
Yeah, so it came from the States. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. On more than one occasion, there were these pieces that were sent in?
On several occasions, maybe at different times, and there was no regularity to it all. He'd send them away for analysis and try to cut pieces off of them do what he could as well.
Yeah.
There's some of those pieces you were saying that some came with a mail, some came by military vehicle. Yeah. So it was a number of them that were arriving.
You actually saw some of these pieces as well, Jim?
Oh, yeah. I saw them even pack the box and what's in there, you know, with that.
How old would you have been then?
Well, looking at 17 is a age group.
Did you get an opportunity to handle any of them? How would you know what was an unusual looking piece of metal that gave you?
I got to handle two of them. One was talk about the size of a brick, semicircular in shape, very smooth metal except where the jagged edges where it had been disconnected from whatever it belonged to. It was quite heavy. In terms of its size, he had analysis of that when I've ever seen that particular analysis sheet come back, and there were a few things in there that they're not found on this planet that were unidentified.
Oh, really?
Well, other than that, they were high tensile steel and whatever else goes into it.
So, presumably that paperwork was secret and he wouldn't have kept any copies of the analysis.
Well, I don't know where it was on.
So I know it wasn't clear, but that was Wilbert Smith's son confirming that he'd handled some of these pieces that come from the US that are from flying saucers that crashed or been shot down. Smith also saw alien bodies. One of the stories about Wilbert Smith included the fact that he had personally viewed dead alien bodies. We were told about the bodies that Wilbert Smith had seen when he was personally invited by the US military. We were simply told that he saw the bodies, and from the impression that I received, it was only for a short time, minutes, not hours. And this was told by Montreal's Flying Saucer Club member. Smith had done talks there in the 50s. Further described the bodies according to what he recalled Mrs. Smith stated. Mr. Smith described to his wife the dead occupants as having been approximately 4.5 to 10 to 5 feet in height, greyish, blue tips of the skin, large eyes, small slit for a mouth, and 4 long fingers with no thumbs. And this is Jim Smith again. It's an unclear audio clip. I will play it though for the record.
Now, you mentioned that he was shown bodies at one point. or something?
Yeah, on one of the times, he was in the States a lot, partly due to his work as a superintendent of radio regulation, so he had to deal with frequency allocation channels, radio, and that sort of business. So he was frequently on committees in the States where they were working out joint frequency allocations, for example. And on several occasions, he decided not to show things along that line. That was pretty well under the Official Secrets Act, he told us. However, just before he passed away in 62, he felt the act couldn't get him any more time for. I did ask him, and he said yes, he saw the bodies.
And he had several connections with high-ranking military folks, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
One of them was Rear Admiral Knowles, I believe.
Yeah, we were at the little home on many occasions.
Yeah. He was with the Office of Naval Intelligence?
Yeah.
Right, so there was opportunity there for this type of thing to be legit. He wasn't just, he was told these things were there.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting to be a fly on the wall at those social gatherings, wouldn't it?
Unbelievable. Yeah. Did he describe them at all? Do you recall any?
Not that I can recall, except that the descriptions that out and about were fairly accurate.
The descriptions that were out and about were fairly accurate.
We have descriptions of graves at that time?
I think there were descriptions of smallish types. I don't know about necessarily coloring, but
I don't remember a lot of those details. I just to satisfy my curiosity that he had seen them and that they were real.
So Smith told us only seen any bodies. So that seems pretty conclusive to me. Smith eventually concluded that there was no point in investigating because he said Smith felt there was little point in trying to establish the reality of the phenomena or ploughing and reploughing the same field because he knew that they were real. He knew that there were these aliens coming here in craft. He knew that by the time of his death. So why would once you knew that, why would you bother doing a further investigation? He wanted to find out the meaning of the phenomena, and he talks about that as well in some of his work. Okay, so moving on then from Wilbert Smith, and again there's a whole presentation about that, and I don't think a book has been written about Smith. Grant Cameron and I talked about doing that a good few years ago, we never did. So here's a clip for you. I hope if it works.
In 1965, Gordon Cooper was the last American astronaut to go up into space alone. He orbited the planet 22 times.
I think it's those of you that know me. I know that I've always spoken honestly and straightforward to you. I intend to do so today.
10 years earlier, while stationed at Edwards Air Force Base, Cooper witnessed an event that has yet to be explained nearly 50 years later. He was supervising the filming of a precision landing facility for F-86 fighter jets. Suddenly, a saucer-like craft flew directly over the cameraman. 3 landing gear apparatus opened, and the object landed on the dry lake bed.
They're just typical saucer shape, double lenticular shape, metallic. And they went out, picked up their cameras and moved on out toward him filming. And he lifted off, put the gear back in the well, and climbed out at a very high rate of speed and disappeared.
Cooper had the film footage of the strange craft developed. By the time it returned from processing, he had gone up through the ranks to report the incident.
I remember the colonel telling me to, when the film arrived at my desk, to put it in the carrier pouch. There would be a courier there at my office by that time already, and they'd arranged for him to fly in our base airplane back to Washington with these films.
Did you watch the film?
We didn't have a chance to run it. I had a chance to hold it up to the window and look at it. It was certainly a good film.
After the developed film was sent by plane to Washington, it was never seen or heard of again.
Did you ever keep in touch with anybody about it or discuss it?
How would I keep in touch with anybody about it? There's no way within the military or within the government of keeping track of something that is classified, unless you're directly involved in it, and I was not.
They filmed a landing at Edwards Air Force Base. Tic Tacs, anybody? No. No thanks. Now, I'm going to play another video now about Travis Walton's case. Now, I met Travis Walton in 2016 because he did a talk at Gary Heseltine's conference in Holmfirth. And he says about his case, if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't get out of the truck. A movie was made about his case, Fire in the Sky, but they completely changed the abduction sequence because Travis Walton was abducted and taken up into a flying saucer. Now, I've read his book, and I think if you read his book, you'll see that the first, 120 pages are about the case, and the next 200 pages are all about the debunking attempts. People that tried to debunk his case, and what the real story behind that was. But they had, in Fire in the Sky movie from 1993, they had Travis being, dragged by the feet through this horrible alien spaceship. They were sticking things in his eye and sticking things in his face and stuff. Never happened. That's not what he described in his book or his experience. So you're going to hear his experience here. I hope. This will take place.
Just after sunset on the evening of November 5th, 1975, a 7-man crew was piling into a 4-wheel drive vehicle after finishing a day of wood cutting near the tiny northern Arizona community of Snowflake. One of the 7 men was Travis Walton, whose curiosity that night plunged him into a living nightmare he would never forget. Just before leaving the work area, the men in the Jeep watched a glowing object emerge from behind the trees. Travis opened a door to get a better view and continued watching, stunned with his companions.
The thing was about 90 feet away, about 20 feet in diameter, about 8 feet high. It was glowing a golden color, kind of like molten metal. Couldn't hear anything at first. It must have been because when I got closer I could hear it. But it was a high-pitched intermittent sound and a low rumbling sound. It sounded like machinery or a heavy mechanical sound. Very difficult to describe.
Travis got out of the vehicle and moved toward the object, despite cries from his friends for him to return. Walton assumed by the time he could get any closer, the object would be gone.
Just as I got up close, it started to move with a sort of a rocking motion, kind of like a spinning top, like when it's slowing down to fall over, except it wasn't spinning at the same side, it stayed toward me. And when it started to move, it got real loud, and that really scared me. I jumped down behind the log, and I looked up at this thing, and I decided then I was in a lot of danger and I was going to get the heck out of there. And I raised up to go. That's the last thing I remember. I raised up and I started to turn, and I was just about in a high crouch when I felt a numbing shock hit me. Kind of like in the head, and I went out. I was knocked unconscious.
His 6 co-workers, however, saw what Travis had not. A slender beam of intense light which shot from the craft and lifted Walton off his feet, knocking him to the ground. The rest of the crew sped away in panic, looking back to see the craft take off. But when they returned to see if Travis was all right, he was nowhere to be found. When Travis finally came to, he was weak, groggy, and in pain. Above him was a light. He assumed he was in a hospital bed, but as his blurred vision became clearer, he discovered he was wrong.
I felt something pressing on my chest. My shirt and my jacket pushed up, and there was this thing laying across it. It was about 4 or 5 inches thick. The thing extended down over my rib cage and down to my belt. And when I looked up and I saw this thing, it was gray. And I looked past the edge of it and I saw something white. My eyes weren't focusing, and then at first I thought it was a doctor, white mask and cap. But when I got to where I could see, I saw this thing, and I just came unglued. I looked around me, and there was 3 of them. I just panicked and became hysterical.
As his eyes became accustomed to the surroundings, Travis saw his captors in more detail.
They were about 4 feet 10. large heads, no hair on their heads, no eyebrows, no whiskers or anything like that. They had very large eyes. Those eyes are something that really bothered me worse than anything. The rest of the features are small. It was like small ears, small nose, small mouth, hardly any lips if they had any lips. I never saw them open their mouth. But they were wearing long coverall type things. They were orangish tan. When I saw them, I struck out. It wasn't really a blow. I was so weak. I pushed this one on my right, and he fell back into another. They felt kind of marshmallow, kind of like fat, you know. Whereas, when you push against somebody with muscle, it feels differently. But they seemed light, unexpectedly. And I jumped off the table there and staggered over into the corner. There was a bench across the wall, and I leaned there. I was really weak, and I was so scared, I was shaking, and they started towards me. And I started just screaming now, telling them to keep away from me. And I reached over and I grabbed a thing off of the table. There was a bunch of things there, and there was a clear tube about maybe an inch in diameter, I don't know, a foot and a half long. And I thought, it wasn't heavy like glass, and it was too light for a club, and so I wanted to defend myself, and so I hit it against the table to break it and maybe get a sharp point, but it didn't break. But I lashed out at it with it, and I kept screaming. It only took a couple of steps, and they stopped.
After the creatures departed, Travis left the room through the same door, but went down the hallway in the opposite direction.
I came to a doorway on my right, and I went into this, I didn't go right in. I looked in, and it was a round room, a domed room, with a chair in the middle. And it was really funny about this room. It was really strange. It looked like, I could see the walls and everything, the same as everything else in that place. It was all just this matte gray metal look. But when I went towards the chair, I didn't go towards the chair right away. I walked around towards the side because the chair was high backed, and I was afraid that there might be one of those things sitting in that chair. So I went around there. When I could see that there was nobody in the chair, I walked over to it. But the closer I got to the chair, the darker the room seemed. And I could start seeing points of light, like stars. There was buttons there. And I did a stupid thing. I pushed some, hoping to open the door or something. But when that didn't work, well, I got scared of doing that too, because it made the stars move. I turned, and there was a man standing at the doorway I came through. And this guy, he appeared human to me, which was a big relief. And I ran up there and started asking him all kinds of questions, and just smiled, kind of tolerant. And I assumed that maybe he couldn't hear me because he had that helmet on his head, a clear helmet. And so when he motioned for me, he took me by the arm, I went with him. I assumed I was being rescued.
Travis was led out of the craft and into a large hangar, where more human-like figures were present. He remembers their appearance this way.
They passed, on the street, but they had a strange thing to their eyes. They were a light color, a golden hazel, and they had a resemblance to each other, like a family, but not identical. There was one of them that was a woman, I could tell. Had longer hair and female shape. One of the men and the woman came over there, and they put me on the table, and they put a mask over my face, and I started to resist, and they held me on the table, and they put this mask on my face, and I reached up to pull it away, and before I could, everything went black.
Meanwhile, the other members of the woodcutting crew had reported Walton missing. Local police organized a search party, but no trace of Walton was found. The next thing he remembered, Travis was lying on the side of a road outside Heber, Arizona, 12 miles from Snowflake.
When I first regained consciousness, I was laying on the roadway, well, to the side of the road, more off than on, and my head was on my arm, and I saw a light, and I looked up in time to see it go off, which I think was either a light going off or a hatch closing, perhaps. Then I saw this object hovering there. It was a flattened sphere. I mean, it was shaped like a disc, but it was very shiny, chrome-like. I could see that reflecting everything around there, but not giving off any light. It was dark. It was just there for a second, hovering about 4 feet off the ground, and then it just shot straight up. It was incredible how quick, without making a sound.
Travis staggered to a phone booth to call his family, who at first did not believe it was really him. But once convinced, they came to take him home. On the way, Travis received yet another shock.
We were riding back in, and they said something about everybody being worried about me. I can't remember the exact conversation, but I said, well, it must have been a bad couple of hours or something to reference the time or something like that. And they said, Travis, you've been gone for 5 days.
While recuperating, Travis was able to remember most of what had happened to him. A series of hypnotic regressions with Dr. James Harder from the University of California, however, enabled Walton to recall things with less anxiety and more detail.
So there are many explanations put forward for Travis Walton's experience. For me, the simplest is that he saw a flying saucer in the forest where he was working with his mates, ran towards it, the beam came out, knocked him to the ground. The people on the ship thought, oh, flipping it, that's not supposed to happen. And they picked him up, took him away for 5 days, fixed him up, and in that time he woke up, and then they brought him back to Earth. That's the most logical explanation, particularly when you hear what happened to the friends that were left behind. And they were accused of his murder because he was gone for 5 days. Not accused, sorry, but suspected of his murder. There's a little footnote to that story because one of the guys that you saw the pictures of, saw those 4 or 5 black and white pictures right at the end. One of those guys, I can't remember which one, was called Steve Pierce. He was one of the other lumberjacks that worked with Travis on that day. Now, when that all kicked off, he just couldn't handle it. I think he was like 17, 18 or something. And he just disappeared. He just disappeared. And Travis didn't hear from him for years. And then back in 2010, he came and spoke to Travis, and they ended up doing an interview on Coast to Coast, the Art Bell show, or George Nuri show as it was then, actually. And when he was on that show, and I listened to that at that time, in around about 2010, 2011, I think it was, around that time, he told the story that he just couldn't handle it, and he had to leave, and he started living under his middle name of Jeff. But he said that there was this other person that came and spoke to him, and this person was called Philip Klass, a well-known UFO debunker. There was actually a picture of Philip Klass in that initial video clip that I showed you. And Philip Klass offered Steve Pierce $10,000 to say that the Travis Walton story was a hoax. Why would he do that? He's got that kind of money to make that sort of offer to somebody. So that's a scene from the still from the Hollywood film. That's not what happened. That's not what you heard him describe. He described lying on bed. He ran out and punched these aliens, and they ran away. And then they placated him and pacified him, and then he woke up on the road. That's what he described. That's not in the film. That's not in the film. Okay, so I'll do a few of these slides, and then we'll have a break. So, have we been getting disclosure in films and TV? Well, possibly. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Who was the first UFO abductee? I've already shown you one of them, which was Travis Walton, and there are many other stories. I'll mention a couple more later, probably. But who's the first one? Well, it was actually Bugs Bunny. Let's see if this will work. If it works.
Oh, that wasn't a bit nice. You have made me very angry.
What infantile minds? How Buck Rogers can you get?
When I put that in, it's a bit weird, isn't it, when you think that alien abduction stories weren't very common, so for that to come in 1952, it's kind of odd. Okay. So we've had the good and bad alien movies, of course. Since the 1950s, we've had a mixture of films and TV. In the 50s and 60s, they were predominantly, though not exclusively, portrayed as rather evil. Perhaps this was because it was meant to reflect the Cold War at the time, perhaps. Who knows? We had these things like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and we had War of the Worlds and stuff, the famous George Powell film, Earth versus Flying Saucers, which actually there's an interesting sort of, how can I put it, parallel in that with the research of Wilhelm Reich, actually. Somebody illustrated this to me fairly recently. Forbidden Planet is a very interesting film. If you've not ever seen that, it's a really good film from whatever it was, 1956, I think. Really interesting film. And in 1977, we had the extraordinary Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Some suggested that the final sequence was based on an actual landing at Holloman Air Force Base that happened in the 1950s. And I've got an account here about E.T., the extraterrestrial, which I'll play you probably after the break. And in 2009, Grant Cameron reported that it had been confirmed that after a private showing in the White House, Ronald Reagan leaned over, and in fact, I mean, you can read that, but after the break, you'll see the clip in relation to that, and it's very interesting. So I think we'll have a break there, and you can either get a drink or go to the loo, whatever, and we'll come back maybe in like 15 minutes or something like that. Okay? Thank you.
1949, again near Roswell, 2 discs crashed. They recovered 5 alien bodies from these discs. They scoured the area by foot patrol, by jeep patrol, and by aircraft reconnaissance, and discovered an alien live from the crash wandering in the desert. They captured him. He was designated EB, extraterrestrial biological entity. EB was taken to Los Alamos, where he was placed in a Faraday shielded environment because he had the ability to read the thoughts and transmit thoughts to people outside of where he was being held captive. The next most important thing that happened after they found EB came a few years later. EB became ill, and they tried to save him. They were unsuccessful. They didn't know how to go about it. But in an attempt to save him, and also in an attempt to gain favor with this technologically superior race, they began broadcasting out into space for help. We have one of your people here who crashed in one of your ships. We're trying to save his life. He's dying. Please help us save his life. By doing that, they hoped, number 1, to make contact, number 2, to make friendly contact, number 3, that the aliens would see us as a benevolent people trying to help one of theirs and would not attempt to destroy us or hurt us. EB died in June of 1952. As of the time of EB's death, we had not had any answer to the message that we had sent out into space. The movie that you saw, called E.T., is the story of EB. They have changed some things around to make it more palatable to you. The beginning of the story, he's running around the desert. He's lost. The government is chasing him. In the real story, the government caught him. In the movie, the little boy gets him. And they form this symbiotic relationship. They're each getting something from the other. And it's a wonderful story. Well, in real life, EB was assigned an Air Force officer to watch over him, become his friend, get as much information from him as he could, be his mentor, be his captor. And the same symbiotic relationship developed between EB and this Air Force officer, to the point where when EB died, the Air Force officer cried. He was deeply hurt. He'd lost a dear friend, because he had been with EB literally night and day since they had found him. In the movie, EB gets very ill, and everybody's very concerned. And the little boy plays the role of the Air Force officer. And you see that he cries. But in the film, he lives. E.T. Call Home was Project Sigma to attempt to make communications with the aliens to come and help save the life of Evie.
I was there.
You were there? Okay, so is it... The story that I heard was that when Reagan saw it, he started talking about how close to reality it was, and he was quickly ushered out of the room. Is that true?
No, he wasn't ushered out of the room. He was the President of the United States. Nobody could usher Ronald Reagan out of the room. It was in the White House screening room.
Yeah.
And Reagan got up to thank me for bringing the film to show him, to show the President, the First Lady, and all of their guests, which included Senator Day O'Connor in her first week as a justice of the Supreme Court, and included some astronauts. I think Neil Armstrong was there. I'm not 100% certain, but it was an amazing evening, and he just stood up and he looked around the room almost like he was doing a head count, and he said, "I want to thank you for bringing E.T. to the White House. We really enjoyed your movie." And then he looked around the room and he said, "And there are a number of people in this room who know that everything on that screen is absolutely true." And he said it without smiling. But he said that, and everybody laughed, by the way. The whole group laughed because he presented it like a joke, but he wasn't smiling as he said it.
So, Bill Cooper in 1989 said that the story of E.T. was essentially true. Reagan said it to Steven Spielberg. You have Spielberg actually recounting that story 22 years later. Make of that what you will. But I think my conclusion is a flying saucer crashed with aliens in it, and the US government took them into its custody. That's what I think happened. So what do they know from all of that? What do people in the government black programs know? I think they know a hell of a lot that they haven't really told us. Now, Bill Cooper was a Navy officer, and he got interested in the UFOs subject. If you read his book, Behold a Pale Horse, he recounts when he was on a ship, and he saw some type of flying saucer, or he might not have been sort of ship, but an object going under the sea when he was on the ship in the middle of the ocean, flying out into the air and coming back in and going and landing about 5-6 times in a row. That's how he got interested. You can read his book, Behold a Pale Horse. Okay. There's been another raft of cliched movies such as Independence Day. I'll show you a clip from that later. That's an important clip to show you actually. 1993. We've talked about that film, Fire in the Sky. This is, Contact was, I think, 1997. I haven't put the year for that one. I think it was 97, late 90s, second half of the 90s. Thank you. That seemed to break the mould because it arguably introduced the notion of consciousness and dimensional travel. That was a kind of newish thing. And what's interesting about Contact is, do you know who wrote the story? Yeah. Carl Sagan. It's his only science fiction novel. Did you know that Carl Sagan had a top secret clearance? He worked on a program for the US military to put a nuclear bomb on the moon in 1959. That's in my book. So he wasn't just a TV astronomer. Carl Sagan was a very interesting figure. So now we're going to hear from some presidential people, or presidential-related candidates and things. Just use these plates.
Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
And your children. I couldn't help at one point in my discussions privately with General Secretary Gorbachev, when you stop to think that we're all God's children wherever we may live in the world, I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species from another planet outside in the universe, we forget all of the local differences that we have between our countries, and we would find out once and for all that we really are all human beings here on this earth together.
I got a letter from 13-year-old Ryan from Belfast. Now, Ryan, if you're out in the crowd tonight, here's the answer to your question. No. As far as I know, an alien spacecraft did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And Ryan, if the United States Air Force did recover alien bodies, they didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know.
The godmother of your daughter, Shirley MacLaine, writes in her new book that you sighted a UFO over her home in Washington State. Did you see a UFO?
I did, and the rest of the account, it was an unidentified flying object, okay? It's like, it's unidentified. I saw something.
You know, also at this debate earlier this week, there was a bit of a humorous moment when Congressman Dennis Kucinich said that he had seen a UFO. But that's something that you're intimately familiar with yourself.
Well, a UFO is an unidentified flying object, and when I was back as a peanut farmer and the head of a Lions Club in the southwest Georgia, I and about 25 others saw something in the air that changed colors and was round and came and left. We couldn't figure out what it was. It was unidentified as far as we were concerned, but I think it's impossible, in my opinion, some people disagree, to have space people from other planets or other stars to come into this thing. I don't think that's possible.
Well, it's certainly proof, though, Mr. President, that you can see a UFO and go on to become president of the United States. So maybe it's not over for Congressman Kucinich yet.
So there's not a footnote to that story in that it's said that there was a Carter was partly read into the UFO file, the UFO program, and somebody went in after he'd had a meeting with somebody and found Carter in tears because he'd been told certain truths, apparently. Now, I don't know whether that story is true, but it's been persisted for a long time. Also, what was it, trying to think of there? Oh, yeah, the thing with Clinton, where he read out that letter from Ryan, according to research by Grant Cameron, Ryan didn't exist. There was no, he just brought that up randomly at that speech in Belfast. Another clip here now, I hope.
Manny Pacquiao's on the way. President Bill Clinton is here with us, so if I was president, and I won't be, let's be honest, the first thing I would do after putting my hand on that Bible and taking that oath to serve the country is, I wouldn't even probably finish the oath. I would run to the White House. I demand to see all the classified files on the UFOs. Because I want to know. I want to know what has been going on. Did you do that?
Sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah, we had, I think it was at the beginning of my second term, we had the anniversary of Roswell.
You waited that long?
I did.
Wow.
Well, I didn't. And then there's also Area 51. You remember there was a great sci-fi movie where there was an alien kept deep under the ground in Area 51? So first I had people go look at the records on Area 51 to make sure there was no alien down there. And people thought that because everybody who works there has to stop about an hour away and put on special clothing and then drive in and out. And that's because a lot of our stealth technology is made there. We know that now, but there are no aliens there. So then when the Roswell thing came up, I knew we'd get, zillions of letters. So I had all the Roswell papers reviewed, everything.
If you saw that there were aliens there, would you tell us?
Yeah.
You would?
I think, look, what do we know? We know now we live in an ever-expanding universe. We know that there are billions of stars and planets literally out there, and the universe is getting bigger. We know from our fancy telescopes that just in the last 2 years, more than 20 planets have been identified outside our solar system that seem to be far enough away from their suns and dense enough that they might be able to support some form of life. So it makes it increasingly less likely that we're alone.
Oh, you're trying to give me a hint that there are aliens.
No, I'm trying to tell you I don't know. But if we were visited someday, I wouldn't be surprised. I just hope that it's not like Independence Day.
Yeah, right.
That it's a conflict.
Well, now we have friends.
Maybe the only way to unite this incredibly divided world of ours. They're out there. We better think of how all the differences among people on Earth would seem small if we felt threatened by a space invader. That's the whole theory of independence.
You're right.
Everybody gets together and makes nice, and
you and Bill O'Reilly would be hiding in a bunker together.
Every mean thing he ever said about me, I don't care. Look at that.
Something I feel like if I was the president, and it's unlikely that that is ever going to happen.
You never know.
If I was the president,
It was unlikely that I was going to be president.
the moment I was inaugurated, my hand would it'd still be hot from touching the Bible, and I would immediately race to wherever they have the files about Area 51 and UFOs, and I go through everything to find out what happened. Right. Did you do that?
That's why you will not be president. That's the first thing that you would do. The aliens won't let it happen. You reveal all their secrets. They exercise strict control over us.
Now, there are a lot of people that are going to examine your facial expressions here, every twitch, everything, and say, and of course, so did you look? Did you see? Did you explore?
I can't reveal anything.
Oh, really? Because President Clinton said he did go right in, and he did check, and there was nothing.
Well, that's what we're instructed to say.
All right.
That's right.
When we had your husband, President Clinton, on this show, he said, I asked him about UFOs in Area 51, and if he looked at, because if I was president, that's the first thing I do. I go right into those files and see what was going on.
Right.
And he said that he did do that.
Yes.
And then he didn't find anything.
Well, I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah, why not?
Right? And there's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Unexplained aerial phenomenon,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, UAP. That's the latest nomenclature.
I like the old one. I like UFO. I don't know why.
Well, I think we can use them interchangeably, but I would like us to go into those files and hopefully make as much of that public as possible. If there's nothing there, let's tell people there's nothing there.
What if there is something there?
Well, if there is something there, unless it's a threat to national security, I think we ought to share it with the public.
Well, what if everybody's all hopped up on medical marijuana and everybody gets paranoid? I would love it.
That's why I want more research.
If you share it with me, I'll decide what is the best course of action. I really have my ear to the ground.
Well, I'm more than happy to do that.
If you don't know about the Clintons, look up Tainted Blood and what they did with getting blood from people in prison.
And the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah.
Before you leave
Bring me
office,
up to
would you
date.
let us know if there's aliens? Because this is the only thing I really want to know.
Well,
I want to
video's
know
not
what's
my fault.
going on. Would you ever open up Roswell and let us know what's really going on there?
So many people ask me that question.
I know it sounds almost ridiculous, but it's actually the real question.
It sounds like a cute question, but it's actually, there are millions and millions of people that want to go there, that want to see it. I won't talk to you about what I know about it, but it's very interesting. But Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
So you're saying you may declassify, you'll take it?
Well, I'll have to think about that one. Right?
All right.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.
Sorry, I thought I had another clip there, so I'm slightly mistaken on my part there. So also about Obama, he was the only presidential candidate to go on a tour of Europe, and there is strong evidence, as investigated by Sheriff Arpaio, that he wasn't born in the US. I think he was born in Africa somewhere. So he wasn't even a legitimate US president. Also strange things about Michelle Obama and her book, for example, Becoming, Michelle Obama. You might want to look into that. And more recently, while we're on the subject of puppet world leaders, the investigation by Xavier Poussard into Brigitte Macron, the First Lady of France. And Candace Owens has presented all of that evidence that Brigitte Macron, who is like 24 years older than Emmanuel Macron, was born a biological male. And so, what's that about? I've not heard that one, but yeah. So I'll play a little clip from this if audio will work. So this is just a clip from Paul, which I thought was quite true. I don't know if the audio's coming up.
You go as soon as we can.
You've been deceived by an agent of Satan himself. These people.
It's a bit rude. You know, we're trying to help him get home. He's from another world.
There's only one world, our world, the world that our God the Father created.
Hey, if it makes you feel any better, my existence only disproves traditional notions of the Abrahamic Judeo-Christian God, as well as all one-world theology. That's all I meant.
Amazing
Just listen to me for 1 second, please. If you could just calm down. I can't drive like this. Fuck this.
What did you do to her?
I just transferred my collective knowledge and experience via tactile psychokinetic bridge.
Oh, wow. Did you do me?
It really takes it out of me.
Oh, come on, please.
Yeah. I always knew what was going on in Battlestar before me because his mum had cable.
Pull over, I'll do you.
Absolutely not. No spoilers.
So everything that I have been told my whole life is just a big fat lie. Do you know how that feels?
No, look, just because your truth isn't a true truth doesn't mean there is no true truth. That's really not.
So there's no heaven, no hell, no right, no wrong, no sin.
I just wanted to say thanks. I know this has been weird for you, but you saved my life and I owe you one, okay? Okay. What do you got there, by the way? Severe retinal memory, complicated by macular edema in your left vitreous cavity?
How did you know that?
Lucky guess. Do you mind if I take a look at it for 1 second? What does it say in the Old Testament? An eye for an eye?
Wait, I don't
It's okay. You can trust me.
I don't know.
Just have a little faith, okay?
How did you do that?
Evolution, baby.
So I like that film because it's got what you saw in that edited clip that I put together was expanded consciousness. So Simon Pegg, I forget the name of his character, and the girl lady character, they experienced expanded consciousness through the alien, and also the alien healed her spontaneous healing. That's the sort of areas that this ends up getting into, this whole topic, ultimately, what these advanced beings know about and are capable of. And Wilbert Smith got a sniff of this, I think, back in the 50s. So that I was quite surprised when I watched that film. You know, there's some daft things in the plot, but Sigourney Weaver's in it, and it's got a very funny ending. So if you haven't seen that, yeah, it's got a few profanities in it, but it's good. Steven Spielberg did this weird thing with War of the Worlds, where it just became very dark, and you know that was weird. After he did Close Encounters, it wasn't dark. Anyway, right, where are we? Alien abductions, very complex phenomenon. If you want to study some cases, go back to one of the original ones, Betty and Barney Hill, 1961. Read their book, The Interrupted Journey. And it probably was a military project. Now, Obama made this joke reference to the aliens weren't letters. Who's to say that aliens aren't already working with the US government or parts of the US government? You know, Obama made a joke of it, but what if he was making a joke of it because it's actually true? And perhaps these government programs that were done in conjunction with aliens, that's what happened to Betty and Barney Hill. And if you read the stories about Eisenhower making an agreement with aliens in 1954, the so-called Grijalva Treaty, I thought that was made up. I thought it was rubbish. But then I did a bit more research and there appears to be some truth to it. That's in my book, in the Acknowledge book. Talked about Travis Walton. Stan Romanek, read into his case. He had ongoing experiences and, things coming to his house, patches appearing on the grass in his garden, lights in the park that he witnessed with other people. I've got a whole section on him in my book as well. My lab's Leah Haley. She thought she was being abducted by aliens. Then after several years of horrible experiences, she was pretty sure that it was a military project that she was involved with. And her story's in the book as well. She's written her own book as well called Lost is the Key. So, get all of that if you want the primary source. And then I think we're on the next slide, if this is coming up. Just have to go to here. Sometimes it just loses focus. There's a Netflix documentary about this case released within the last 6 months. Linda Napolitano. Now, event centres around Linda Cortile, or Napolitano, New York resident who came forward with an account of an abduction of herself and her son by grey aliens about 3 a.m. on the 30th of November 1989. And I've got a clip in a minute, just a 1-minute clip. It involved this fellow. You may know his name, I didn't know the face, Perez de Cuellar, the former Secretary General of the United Nations. Now, Stephen Greer says that what they did was, when world leaders were going to try and disclose certain things, they would take them aside and say, look, we've got technology, and this is what we can do. And they showed him, I think this is the story anyway, I've got it all in my book, they showed de Cuellar an abduction that they were doing, and the subject in this case was Linda Napolitano. They abducted her, and he was present when the abduction was done, apparently.
All of the polls suggest that a majority of the American people believe UFOs are physically real, rather than imaginary hoaxes or whatnot.
I'm standing at exactly the spot where this very strange event was seen at 3 a.m. really on November 30th, 1989. A woman was driving from Brooklyn to New York, right down here in the outer lane. Her car engine died, the lights went out, and she looked over to this building, the one in the distance with the little pointed roof, and at that point she saw a burst of light as a UFO hovering only a few feet above it, turning on all of its lights. 2 small figures below her and one above her. The light was intense. The woman was terrified and thought, they must be making a movie. This is a film of some sort. And the figures floated up into the UFO, and then the UFO changed its lights, zoomed out across the river and across the bridge and disappeared. And the woman's car lights and engine started back up again. But this is the way it started for her that night.
So that was a witness to Linda. The woman he was referring to wasn't Linda Napolitano. That was somebody on the street who saw what happened. So not only do they know what these things are, they've got their own advanced craft and they can abduct people with them, with advanced technology. But they're telling you, we don't know what these drones are. It's hilarious. Now, if you want to have some other evidence of very strange technology in operation, then you can investigate the cattle mutilation phenomenon, where sheep, cattle, horses, goats, and even cats and dogs have mysteriously been mutilated around the world. And it has seemed to have become more widespread in the UK since the 1970s. You can watch Richard D. Hall's documentary Silent Killers, that's all in there. Linda Moulton House collected some evidence in the USA too, but she's compromised. She's an intelligence asset for a lot of what she puts out. So this comes into, also connects with these stories of deep underground military bases, where there's supposedly like Area 51, for example, there's meant to be underground bases there where they've got craft and where they take people and do stuff to them. There are rumoured to be bases at Rudloe Manor, which is near Bath. That's one that's rumoured to exist in the UK. Todmorden is another one possibly there, under the hills there. I know a person that thinks there's one there, and he's a very well-respected person. I won't say any more than that. Peasemore, Barry King, there's probably a base there, but it's not to do with aliens. We think that was disinformation. Richard D. Hall investigated that case. And this chap, Dan Sherman, Richard D. Hall did an interview with him. He claimed to work at an underground base in his book Above Black, where he was telepathically communicating with aliens, with Above Black, on this, what's the project called? Project Preserve Destiny, PPD. Richard did an interview with the guy, so you can decide for yourself whether you think he's making his story up. It doesn't have a lot of evidence to back it up, but it ties in with certain other things that have been said. Now, going back to the cattle mutilations and linking it to the underground military bases, do it again. Let's just use this. If you read this book, Dulce Base, by Greg Valdez, it will answer a lot of your questions about the Dulce Base, which is a very well-known story about an alien base in New Mexico, if I get the state right. And it's very, very interesting because, according to this Branton source and Phil Snyder, all these aliens are there. There was a big war in the 1970s, they called it the Dulce War, and there's all these aliens there, blah, blah, blah. But there is also a sort of connected story with the Paul Benowitz case. He was an electronics engineer. He was selling electronics equipment to the military, and he lived opposite Kirtland Air Force Base. And that's where directed energy weapons were being developed in research there. Now, Paul Benowitz accidentally discovered two black programs, a secret Air Force project and an optical stealth project called Project Starfire. That's all in my book, and it's in this book as well. And what it appears is that Paul Benowitz was then fed disinformation about aliens to cover up the fact that they were developing this optical stealth technology and and also this Project Starfire, which was to reprogram Russian satellites from the ground. That's all in his book, and it's in Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, as well. Valdez illustrates that an advanced type of aircraft was being used to visit cattle and remove and return carcasses. This clandestine work was part of at least two other programs related to checking for radiation contamination in animal tissue in the area. Valdez also hints that secret biowarfare research had been done, and the cattle mutilations were probably somehow related to these experiments. And on one visit, because what happened with Greg Valdez was that he was visiting with his father. So his father was a police officer called Gabe Valdez, and when Greg was very young, sort of 8, 9, 10 years old, he would go on patrol with his dad, and for example, they found this at one of the sites, this orb in the top right here, and this was probably part of some drone technology that they had back then. This is in the sort of 70s or 1980s. And what they eventually concluded was that there was a base at Dulce, but it was kind of in the hillside, and they found a vent and stuff like that. It was not it was in the Archuleta Mountain, not the Archuleta Mesa, which is 2 or 3 miles from there. And this base was an off-site laboratory, for guess where? Los Alamos National Laboratories. And at this point, I'll just mention Los Alamos again, because I've talked about UFO crashes, and one of the ones that did happen, and I'm convinced it happened, was in 1948, April 1948, the Aztec crash. And it was said for decades to be a hoax. But there's a chap called Scott Ramsey, I think I've got, I don't know if I've got, yeah, I might have a slide of it, so I might be getting ahead of myself. But Scott Ramsey wrote this book, and he showed in that book, which he researched over 30 years, that an object crashed in Aztec, New Mexico in 1948. He identified the witnesses. People went inside the craft. There were 16 bodies inside. And it looks like that craft was brought down deliberately. So people say, oh, why would they come across the galaxy and then just crash? You know, no, they don't come across the galaxy and then crash. They come across the galaxy and then they're targeted by high-powered radar systems and brought down, in some cases. And that's what happened in 1948 with this Aztec crash. And going back to Los Alamos, Scott Ramsey found this installation about, I don't know, I think it was like 50 miles from Los Alamos, sort of just disused. It was some weird building. And eventually, he found out that it was a radar installation, but he couldn't work out what it was for because there were no military bases near there. What was this radar installation for? Well, turns out it was a secret radar installation which was run by Los Alamos, which was to protect Los Alamos from people, coming in planes during the development of the atomic bomb. And he verified that that really was a radar station, so it looks like they used that to shoot down the Aztec flying saucer, or bring it down. So I've got a clip here from Jaime Maussan. I think this is a real video clip, but for some reason, Jaime Maussan invented a story about it, as you'll see here. And I found out about this thanks to Dan Baker.
After watching this story, I will present you the results.
So they interviewed the guy, I haven't got the interview here, but Jaime Maussan interviewed the guy who filmed this, so we know his name, we know he filmed it at the back of his
He
house.
recorded the object almost for 3 minutes, very close. The object affected 2 transformers in the area that were burned. They had to be changed. His cellular phone stopped working. He had physical problems with his memory. He was affected very much. You can see the black dots there. They are not there. It's the tape was affected. The energy was very, very strong. Sometimes these objects are dangerous. Dangerous because they have this energy around them.
And Mauricio Ruiz managed to fix the camera twice because the camera wanted to shoot down. He was very concerned and tried to fix down and continue filming.
I believe this is one of the best videos that have ever been taken here in the U.S. And I can tell you, I can put my hand on fire for this video. This video is absolutely real. And the object produced magnetism. And this, I have the analysis with the law of the University of Mexico to prove it.
So it would appear that this video is altered. Now, not in a way you might expect, because the original video didn't have the magnetic effects that Maussan was claiming, which is really strange. So it looks like they tried to kind of say that this video had been faked, therefore the guy was untrustworthy. But the guy that gave the video didn't include the tape that had this strange sort of effects. They were introduced later. So, although the video is real, I'm convinced that's a real object that you're seeing there. They altered it to try and discredit it. That's what Maussan did, and he didn't have a very good reputation. And I didn't realise this at first when I first showed this. So this video wasn't showing the evidence of the magnetic effect, but it was showing evidence of a flying saucer of some kind, or whatever you want to call it. So we've also got various other stories of landings and crashes from quite a few places. You can look up the Shag Harbour incident from 1967. That's a really interesting one. Roswell, of course, we've mentioned that in brief. I haven't talked about that much because there's so many books on it. Kecksburg in 1965, there's a good documentary about that, which unfortunately was made by the Sci-Fi Channel, but it's a very good documentary. I've got that on the USB stick. I think it's probably knocking around online. And Aurora, Texas, which is one of the earliest ones, 1897. There's some good evidence that a craft crashed there in 1897. That was investigated by Jim Mars, I think. You can look that one up as well. Being was rescued from the wreckage and stuff, and they looked after this being, I think. Let's just see. Just being a bit annoying, this thing, for some reason. Right. Yeah, Rendlesham's a very complicated case. Richard D. Hall's done a lot of work on this as well. Some of the witnesses are telling the truth, some are lying, some have had their memories altered, it would appear. But it involved multiple military witnesses. An object landed in the forest just outside the base. It seems to be one of the most significant cases, certainly in the UK. This is on the News of the World, very famous headline there. And in 2011, there were new revelations regarding a binary coded message that Jim Penniston received. That was all very weird. I don't know if that was just somehow injected into the community somehow. It was very, very strange. But something landed in Rendlesham Forest, and in fact, two different landing sites. I'm not sure whether it was an ET craft, probably not that. It was more likely to be some sort of advanced drone technology, and what they were doing was landing it near a nuclear base to see what happened at the base, to see how good the security was, see what happened in the public, and they therefore struggled now to keep all aspects of this technology covered up. Larry Warren, who is involved in this case and is promoted by Gary Heseltine, is not telling the truth. Larry Warren is unfortunately not telling the truth about his story. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to move on, I think, a little bit now. We've got film from the space shuttle which appears to show flying saucers, or well, ones that appears to show flying saucers. Some is some sort of plasma phenomena which seems to be intelligently controlled. I'll try and play a bit of this if I can, but I'm probably going to skip. So this is from STS-75, I think, and you can see here this thing changing direction and shooting into space. See a close-up here, moving along. Is that a satellite? Is it a shooting star? No, that's intelligently controlled. And not long after this was picked up by Martin Stubbs, I think in New Zealand. You can watch the documentary called the NASA Evidence, I think it's called. They started encrypting the footage so that regular people couldn't watch it who had the right equipment. This you can get a clearer view of this as well. This is from the space shuttle. I think this is STS-80. I haven't got a very good copy of this here. I've got a better one elsewhere. What's this disc coming up? These are all thunderstorms that you see going off, and they seem to be attracted to thunderstorms. So these are plasma ships of some kind, or plasma phenomena of some kind. But they seem to be intelligently controlled. So NASA's got footage of this, and they've had it for 30 odd years at least. Much more footage than this. Let's see. I'll skip over this one. I want to go on a few more and so forth. Yeah, Phoenix Lights, that's a big one. There's whole documentaries about that by Dr. Lincoln Ty and stuff. Loads of ones from that. Loads of people saw them. Tens of thousands of people saw them. So you can check that out. Let's just see. It's going up weird again. Now, people say these pictures are too good to be true. So the skeptic says, well, there aren't any clear pictures of UFOs, so what are you talking about? Any clear pictures of flying saucers, or whatever you want to call them. And then you say, well, what about these? What about these Maslin Beach pictures from Adelaide, Australia in 1993? Oh, those are fakes. Obvious. They're so clear, they must be fake. So the story of this was told to me by Robert Hulse and David Caton. So these particular pictures were taken, as it says, I forget that, I've got the date in my book and everything. And this object, according to Eric Thomason, who was an ex-war veteran as a fighter pilot in the Second World War, he was walking along, he was wanting to take a picture of the sunrise for a photographic competition for his local newspaper, walking along the cliff just at Maslin Beach, south of near Adelaide, and he's walking along the cliff top there with his dog, and this object comes out of the water. And he has the camera with him, and he manages to get off, takes 5 pictures. And as the object is flying over it, water drips on him from the object. And you can see, if you look at the image, I don't know if I've got it on the next slide, that's a close-up, so you can see the definition there. As far as I'm concerned, that's a real image. But also, if you look at these other ones, this other object came down from the sky and docked with it. And there was this, you can't really see it on the slide here, but if you zoom into the full pictures, there's like some type of thread or something. It's not a thread, but we don't know what it is, which links these two objects. Those are real pictures, as far as I'm concerned. That is a real object, an anti-gravity craft, coming out of the sea, which ties into what Bill Cooper said as well. Yeah, I'm going to skip over some of this really. That was the first picture released by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2009. That's meant to be Apollo 11 landing site. The later pictures were a lot better from the same probe. But the Apollo program was a hoax. That's a picture from Apollo 16. That's meant to be Charlie Duke's family in a plastic bag on the moon. That surface temperature is up to 140 degrees centigrade. If you get a plastic bag at 140 degrees centigrade and it will curl up, it will crinkle up, as will the picture inside it. That was shot in a studio. Not to do with the shadows, there's loads more evidence than that. That was shot in a studio. Apollo's hoax. Neil Armstrong even told you that, essentially, in 1994. Those are all the attempts to do Apollo again. They've had another one ongoing since then. What took, let's see. So Apollo was meant to take 8 years. The CXP program in 2004, which Bush announced on the 100th anniversary of powered flight, that was going to take 16 years, with all the advances in technology that we've had since the 1960s. The latest one in 2010 that was announced, they never even announced man on the moon for a return. They're talking about it again now. In Trump's inauguration speech, he talked about putting a man on Mars with Elon Musk there, and he said, we've sent people to the heavens. That's what Trump said. Didn't say we sent people to the moon. And whenever you think of Trump, he said some very interesting things. I'll put it that way. There was a secret space program as well. This is the secret US launch facility. It was secret for a while anyway. That's at Vandenberg Air Force Base. They're on space shuttle. Anybody know that? I only learned about that in the last few years, really. I followed the shuttle program intensely in the 1980s. Never knew about this. In fact, they gave their shuttle to NASA after Challenger blew up. Moll and Almaz, those were two secret space programs. You can read about those. That's in my book, the Finding the Secret Space Program book as well. I'm skipping through a lot of this, I know. Edgar Fouché, he said he had knowledge of this craft, the TR-3B. That's obviously an artist's mock-up. He said he saw one land at Area 51 when he worked there in 1979. He said that involved in the development of the TR-3B was this thing called quasi-crystals, and he was talking about this in a 1998 presentation. When I heard that, I thought, he just got that out of Star Trek. He just made that up. And then I actually researched it and found a paper from Caltech on quasi-crystals. And then I learned that in 2011, Daniel Shechtman, an Israeli chemist, he won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2011 for his work on quasi-crystals. Because people said that he would never go anywhere, but it's called a metamaterial. And Fouché said that they were used in stealth technology. How did he know? How did he know? He claims that this craft operates on principles of anti-gravity and a rotating plasma, a TR-3B, and he describes various other characteristics of his operation. That's all in my book as well, and online. It's all online as well. You don't have to read my book if you don't want. I've just collected the information together. You can, in fact, generate a magnetic field by rotating plasma. Edgar Fouché wasn't a physicist, he was a technician, cryptographics technician originally. So let's see. On a bit more. I know I'm whizzing through this quite quickly, but I'm going to skip over that because that's going to take too long. I will show you this clip though, if I can.
Well, we're not being shown.
Indeed. This is David Percy pointed this out, and I made this little animation, which is extremely peculiar. This is done with a little program. It's quite old now. It's years since I made this. I think it will come back on again. Called PaintShop Pro. Let me see. So that is Cydonia on Mars. That's the Tholus on Mars. That's Silbury Hill. That's Avebury. There's a 14-to-1 ratio. In other words, they're about a mile apart. On Mars, that same thing is 14 miles apart. I think there's a story there that we've not really been told. And I think that story is that there was a civilization on Mars, or still is, which came here, or people from here went there. That's the basis of that story, I think. Could be wrong, but that's what I've come to the conclusion of. That's on Mars. That's 3 miles long. This is from Mars Global Surveyor. That's the image number there. You can find that online if you wish. Go look for it. And I've got another one, I think, on the next slide that I've made into a presentation of sorts, or a little video, I should say. This is in the Secrets in the Solar System. Let's just try and get that up. Okay, let's try this. A couple of minutes. Like a glass dome to me. That looks like a glass dome to me. I could be wrong. I'm not a space images expert, but that's what it looks like to me. There's a whole story behind that image. That's in my book as well, and you know, how I asked questions about it and didn't get any answers. But basically, the thing is that NASA have already found life in the solar system. They found it on Mars in 1976, but if they'd announced that, they maybe wouldn't have continued to get funding for what they wanted to fund, and they would have had to have a massive disclosure, which they didn't want. So they've always kept it just below the sort of baseline, if you will. So we're running short of time, and I'm probably going to skip quite a way ahead now and jump around a bit, so apologies for that. But what I want to, that's a high-res picture of the dome as well. There's a whole story behind that, lots of stories. That's what they've changed. But I want to just go to the view ahead now, if I can do this. I want to tell you about this because this is really important. A couple of things before we finish. Star Child skull. Now, this was investigated by Lloyd Pye. I've got a whole presentation on this. This was found in Mexico in 1930, and it is a skull. It's a real bone skull. It's been carbon dated to 900 years old twice. DNA tested. DNA is all different to human DNA. Looks superficially human, and you can see there the bone thickness of this skull. 3 millimeters compared to 9 millimeters of human. Bone chemistry is all different. It's owned by a lady called Melanie Young. There's a whole weird story behind that. It's all on my website. DNA tested. The DNA of this thing is, dog DNA is more similar to human than the DNA from this skull. FOXP2 gene was discovered. From this evidence, one may conclude that the underlying biochemistry of the entity's life form must either be the same as or highly similar to humans or other species, yet the use of the genetic code, which still remains universal, is distinctively different, implying that this life form is very likely the result of a markedly variant and non-intersecting evolutionary process. That was a geneticist that studied this for about 2 years, studied the DNA and stuff, and did it in the back room of his company with permission, he wouldn't disclose his identity or the company's identity. It's an alien skull as far as I'm concerned. Not what he said, but it's not from around here. I haven't got time to show you that. So now I want to skip. Where's this all going? People have been talking about aliens and stuff, and you know what's going on. Somebody's asking me about where it's all going. Is there going to be disclosure? Well, yeah, probably not. Let's just see where we can get to though. Okay, I'll play the video clip in a minute, but I need to give you a bit of context. I've got a book called Where Did the Towers Go? And what was discovered by Dr. Judy Wood in the research that she did about the destruction of the World Trade Center are a number of weird things. Cars being levitated, turned upside down, people levitated, metal changing from one form into another, metals being melted with no heat, metal turning to dust in midair. Now, one of the companies that was involved in preparing the technical reports for the World Trade Center's destruction was Science Applications International Corporation. Dr. Judy Wood started a court case against them and 22 other military contractors, or rather government contractors I should say. Science Applications International Corporation was named by Dr. Stephen Greer as being involved in the UFO cover-up, black budget programs, the big benefactors of the black budget. Okay? And Edgar Fouché, who I mentioned about the quasi-crystals, he told me that he worked as the Director of Engineering for Science Applications International Corporation. That's what he told me. And they also, SAIC, were in charge of the ground zero security following the destruction of the World Trade Center, and they were involved in setting up the communications network after those antennas had been destroyed on top of the World Trade Center. You've never heard of Science Applications International Corporation, I don't think, or Applied Research Associates that also do research in directed energy weapons. The World Trade Center was destroyed using a directed energy weapon, and if Mark was on the stage here tonight, Mark Conlon, he would be telling you about the planes that people thought they saw weren't real planes, they were image projection technology. 3D volumetric holograms, right? Now it sounds all crazy to those that haven't heard it before, but if you look at Mark's research, Dr. Judy Wood's research, take your time, take a year, take 2 years. Heck, take what I've taken, which is like, took me about 8 or 9 years to get to this point. Longer now, because I've been knowing this for a long time. And you'll end up with what I think they're going to try next, or what they've been moving towards now. They know all about this technology. They know a lot about aliens. You know, they know a lot more. And the UFO disclosure movement isn't putting the pictures together. This is somebody. You know, I put this together. Somebody talked about this, and I made this video clip. It's only like a minute long, or something. Let's hope it plays now after all the build-up. Hey.
Good morning, my name is Carol Rosen. In 1974, after being a 6th grade school teacher, I was introduced to the late Dr. Werner von Braun in the U.S., the father of rocketry. In my first meeting with him, during that first 3.5 hours, he said to me, Carol, you will stop the weaponization of space. And I said, you know, teachers don't stop until June. He said, no, you have to understand, this is February. And we have to prevent the weaponization of space because there is a lie being told to everyone that the weaponization of space is now first being based upon the evil empire, the Russians. There are many enemies, he said, against whom we're going to build this space-based weapon system. The first of whom was the Russians, which was existing at that time. Then there would be terrorism. Then there would be terrorism. Then there would be terrorists. Then there would be third world countries. Now we call them rogue nations or nations of concern. Then there would be asteroids. And then he would repeat to me over and over. And the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. Well, at the time I kind of laughed when he said asteroids, and when he said extraterrestrials, I knew I wasn't going to deal with that subject. And now we hear in the news just today, this week, that they've slid in another enemy. Only this time we're going to protect our satellites. In other words, we have to have some reason to spend these trillions, to waste these dollars on a space-based weapon system, and they're all lies.
probably don't need to show it twice, do I? But if people like Mark Conlon and Chris Hampton are correct, and I think they are correct, you change that image projected plane to a flying saucer, and what you got? You've got your alien invasion. Burj Khalifa or something? That's what I think is potentially on the cards. But you see, there's a problem for them because quite a lot of people are now finding out.
And then he would repeat to me over and over, and the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat. And the last card, the last card, the last card would be the extraterrestrial threat.
You know, they've done COVID, they've done the killer virus, and a lot of people fell for that and came to grief with it, you know, etc., and affected my family, as probably as well as many of your families. So where are you going to go? What's the next threat? They've talked about this asteroid now in 2032, I think. That came out about a month ago. They even said it's now got 4% chance of hitting the Earth. You know, they can divert that asteroid if they really wanted to. Or they could make it come in, as far as I'm concerned. They could divert it in or out, depending on what they want to do. That's what the technology that destroyed the World Trade Center, I think it's capable of that, believe it or not. So there's lots of, like, this guy is just he doesn't connect any of this. He won't talk about World Trade Center destruction. He promotes the architects and engineers thermite nonsense, which he did at a conference that I was at. This is me at Gary Heseltine's conference. And this is Bassett here, Richard Johnson on the left there. He just promotes, that's actually Robert Hulse, the guy who's given me the Maslin Beach pictures, and David Caton, who did the analysis. So, yeah, there's a lot, like Greer won't talk about it. Let's see, I've got the slide of Greer. I'm going to have to, yeah, that was all just a money grabbing operation run by the CIA, in my opinion. Edgar Mitchell worked for the CIA as well. He was Apollo 14 astronaut. He threatened Brewster Palmer over the M machine. It's all interlinked, you see, and people are not connecting it. Colin Andrews thinks Edgar Mitchell was great. Nick Pope is a paid spokesperson, that was on his website. Don't listen to this guy. You might get a little bit of truth from him, but take that and leave the rest, because he's just an op. Government still works for the government. So again, I could go on for hours and hours, but I think I'm just going to skip to the last slide. What is the goal indeed? Well, you know, I haven't got time to show those slides really, because we're about 10 to 10 now, I think. So we've got 10 minutes left for anybody who wants to ask questions, then I'm going to kick us out, I think.
What is the goal?
What is the goal? The goal is what you choose it to be. The goal is control by those that think they are doing the controlling.
I don't achieve that.
The first question is whether how much you want to be subject to their control. There you go. You know the answer then, don't you? Any other questions or comments?
Can I ask you, what's your view on Bob Lazar? Is he an opportunity?
Yeah, so Bob Lazar, I've written up his story in the, I forget which book it is. So I think he's a bit like some of these Renderson witnesses. Some of his story is true, but if you look at his background, he's an expert in nuclear physics, and I think he was brought on to work on some type of nuclear propulsion at Area 51, not a flying saucer. And then he was hypnotised or brainwashed to think that he'd worked on a flying saucer, and he put out that story as disinformation. That whole story about Element 115, that's all disinformation. So some of what he said was true, like a lot of these people, but I don't think his story about working on a flying saucer was true. Somebody else did that, and he was given that story to put out by either hypnosis or something like that, or brainwashing, call it what you will. But I think basically he could be an honest guy, but I've heard since that he used to run a brothel, and he apparently was accused of murdering his wife as well. That's what I heard in the last 2 or 3 years. I hadn't really investigated that, so perhaps I shouldn't have said that. But he's not an above board character, not completely. You know, you've got to take his story with a pinch of salt. It was interesting what Boyd Bushman said about him. If you know what Boyd Bushman, he worked at Lockheed Skunk Works. And he said an interesting thing about Lazar, but again, that's in my book.
We're interested in new technologies, free energy.
Yes.
Are we going to hear more about that? What do you think?
The only way it progressed is when the disclosure that free energy technology was used to destroy the World Trade Center. If Trump comes out with that, or anybody equivalent Trump comes out with that, yes, somebody destroyed the World Trade Center using technology from which we could power the whole world, we might have a chance of getting free energy. Yes, we have technology to alter the weather. I haven't even spoken about that. Hurricane Erin on 9/11, that's in the book. Where did the towers go? All this climate change, it's all nonsense. When you read Where Did the Towers Go, the global terrorism story's gone, climate change is gone, and the energy scarcity is gone. That's all in that book. That's why we've had to publish it ourselves. I'm sort of digressing, but it does link to your free energy question. So all these people that are, saying, oh yeah, we can have free energy, yeah, we can. But you're not going to get it out until those powers that are stopping it, and it's somehow, neutralised. But when they got that technology to do that to the building, they could just do that to the building you're in if they wanted, in theory. So how do we stop that? I don't have an answer to that. But I think it starts with knowing that that is the reality, which is what it is as I see it, rather than just saying to me, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about, or you can't be right because you don't have a degree, PhD in physics. If you're going to just say that to people like me, then nothing will ever change. Unless these people have got the knowledge to do the investigation.
We don't have PhDs in physics.
Okay, thanks.
Is Judy Wood still active in this area?
Not particularly sure. I think if she was asked to do a talk or a podcast, she would, which is not in the greatest of health at the moment. She's all right, but I've still been communicating with her, but she's not actively doing stuff now. I mean, why should she? She's written the book, and as she said, people wanted her to do a second book, but as she said, if she did, it'd just be more of the same. Everything is in that book that she knows. Well, you can ask a question, Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think a lot of the sightings could be linked to what we talk about with the optical stealth type of technology? I know Norio Hayakawa sort of alludes to some of that.
I don't know how many would be projection. How can we tell? It'd be difficult to tell. I think there could be a proportion that there are some form of projection, and maybe these drone sightings, and somebody's talking about one in Bromsgrove, wouldn't there? Maybe they're actually not really drones, they are some sort of projection technology, makes it look like drones, and they're seeing how people react, so that when they want to try and pull something like what I suggested, they've got more information to do that more effectively. But the problem they've got now, as I was listening to Scott Ritter's interview recently, and he was pointing out some very basic things like the news networks now, their power is going now. A lot of people are not listening to news networks. And most of the power to distribute information is through platforms like X or Twitter. So that's where, and there's a lot of influence on this. It's harder for them to control it, so all they can do is just flood it with disinformation. So what I'm saying with that is, it's going to be harder for them to pull a stunt and put it on TV and get it into people's brains like they did with 9/11 or Manchester or whatever. It's getting harder and harder to do that in the way that they did before. They're going to have to think of new ways to do that.
Because I've noticed that people seem more open now to the directed energy, and
I think there is more of an openness to that now than there was 10 years ago, but there's a long way to go. And until these researchers start tackling it, the ones that should be talking about, people like Greer won't talk about it because he's CIA,
compromised.
And I think a lot of these investigators need to connect more of the dots to make more of a difference, I suppose, is how I put it. And any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I've got a really good one.
Go on.
I lecture on nutrition and the circadian rhythm.
Oh yeah.
NASA knows. So we're regulated by daylight.
Yeah.
So if you take daylight away from a human being, what is a 24-hour cycle on Earth reverts to the length of the Martian daylight.
That's right, 25 hours.
Yeah.
Or 24.69, yeah. That's in my book.
It always seems to get ignored.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the link.
Yeah. Somebody sent me an email, this was years ago, and he said that he had knew somebody who was in the military and had some secret knowledge, and he just said, my mate said to me the other day, you know what, white people are from Mars. I thought, that's interesting. When you think of the origin of the different races, they're all slightly different. What's behind all of that? You know, why are black people black, and why are the Chinese and the Eastern races, why are they slightly different? Well, what, is that just evolution? Well, the whole story of evolution is under question if you then you look at whether there are any transitional forms or not. You know, so it's all up for grabs. Any other question? Okay, well, we can maybe get out by 10 then. It was about 2 minutes 10, not bad time, is it? So here's Martin while I fold up my laptop.
Yeah. Well done, thank you.